What's the opposite of a growth mindset? A fixed mindset. And sometimes that's because some of us are naturally talented. I mean, many of you are naturally talented to build a business, to write books, to do the things you do. So you have natural talent, and yet if we're not careful, we say, I no longer need to grow because of my gift or because of my success, and that very success becomes the lid of our life, and we have a fixed mindset. How many times are we in a situation and we say we will never do this again, and 2 weeks later, the same thing happens. 3 weeks later, the same thing happens. The next time the opportunity comes, we return back to our nature, just like as a dog would return to its vomit. There is more hope for fools. This is foolishness, right? This is foolishness. There's more hope for fools, the people who return to their vomit. There's more hope for us. That's a good thing. That's a really good thing. There's more hope for us than for people who think they are wise. And in parentheses, and are not. You ever met somebody who just thinks they just know everything? I read an article yesterday, and so now I know how to change the world. I read an article yesterday, here's my solution for border control. I heard a talking head yesterday, and I'm gonna go on social media and tell everybody how they should believe and vote now. As though we have all of the answers. You ever talk to somebody who's like, hey, I don't know what to do about this situation, and they open up the window for maybe you to bring some wisdom, some guidance to their life, and the moment you step into that, they look at you like they're 10 years old, and they say the phrase that every parent, every teacher, every grandparent, every older sibling hates to hear from the little 8 to 10-year-old, and they say these two words that drive people crazy. I know already. I know. No, you don't know, because if you knew, we would not be in this situation. And this is a very triggering statement for me because I had this conversation with my 8-year-old yesterday. You don't know, but I do know. Tell me what I'm about to say then. Well, I don't know that. You don't know. And yet we revert back to that as we're supposed to be maturing and growing in wisdom. And you know what happens? We revert back to just being wise in our own eyes. I get triggered by this, and I'm probably one of the worst at this. My wife knows that I'm about to go crazy when I'm with my 8-year-old, especially when he was younger, out in public, and our other kids are doing their things. We have 5 kids, by the way. And somebody who's probably well-meaning comes to me as a parent. I know I look young, but I'm not. I have a little kid who kind of keeps me young, and somebody will come up and say, you know, it's because Max, our son, he's a handful. We've been called by the principal more times with one kid than the other 4 kids combined. We've been called by the principal more in the last 10 days than the last 4 kids combined for different things. It drives me crazy. Sir, your son keeps kissing people at school. So I talked to my son. He's like, I am not kissing anybody. These girls are kissing me. And I'm trying to keep a straight face, like, I'm like, yeah. Like, son, that's not wise. Okay, Dad, I will. I'll tell the girls they gotta stop. And they caught up to him. This last week, he got punched by a girl. And of course, my daughters are like, what'd you do? You're awful. He goes, I didn't do anything. But he was a victim of domestic violence. It was one of the girls that kissed him. And she didn't like what he did, or some other girl kissed him, and then he got cleared by the school, so we know he's fine. But I'm walking with this 8-year-old that I'm talking about, and somebody comes up to me and says, you know, you need to do this and this, because by the time they're 10 and 11, and they're trying to tell me how to parent. And maybe I do need some help, right? And then Libby, my wife, starts cringing because she's like, oh, I know what's about to happen. I don't like being patronized. Anybody else just love being patronized? Nobody does. And this person's like, and then this, and then you should do this, because by the time they're 12, and I know my blood is boiling, and my wife is like trying to get out of the situation because she knows I'm going to say something, because now I take off my Pastor Carlos hat, and I just become regular Carlos, and this mouth can get me in trouble if I'm not careful. And I do my best, I promise you as your pastor, I do my best for self-control and to be wise. I try, and they just keep going and going and going, and I'm like, I know, with the other 4 kids we raised, I always say that, and my wife's like, oh, great. And the person always like, oh, you have more children? We do, we have 5. How many do you have? And most times it's less than 5. And I'm like, must have been easy. Now, I don't say that last part, I just think it. But you know what that's rooted in for me? And what this scripture is saying, it's rooted in pride. It's a lack of humility. When in reality, what if I just listened and they actually had a good idea? Even if they have less kids than me. What happened if I just listen? And that's what the scripture is trying to tell us, is like, don't be wise in your own eyes. Don't do that. There's a self-righteousness in that is not of God. So we want to be learning and in learning mode. And really, why? Because the wise are open to learning wisdom from everyone and everything that God may put in their path. That's what it means to be wise. Carol Dweck says this about a growth mindset. A growth mindset is the belief that abilities and intelligence can be developed through dedication, hard work, and the right kind of encouragement. So to have a growth mindset is, I don't know everything, I'm gonna walk in humility, and I'm gonna learn from everyone and everything. So this is Miss Jackie sitting with me saying, you're being a fool. Me learning from her. I didn't learn right away, but here I am 31 years later and I'm quoting her. So she spoke truth into me that stuck to my heart. That's a growth mindset. What's the opposite of a growth mindset? A fixed mindset. And sometimes that's because some of us are naturally talented. Many of you are naturally talented to build a business, to write books, to do the things you do. So you have natural talent, and yet if we're not careful, we say, I no longer need to grow because of my gift or because of my success, and that very success becomes the lid of our life, and we have a fixed mindset. And Scripture is actually just wanting us to have a growth mindset. And here's where people do get upset if we're not careful. Like, well, Carlos, we're not here to learn about pop culture psychology. We don't want to hear from these doctors and therapists. That's great. But it really does line up with Scripture. Because when we're describing Jesus, especially in Luke chapter 2, verse 52, it says this, and Jesus grew. Everybody say grew. He grew in wisdom and stature. And he grew in favor with God and man. Jesus wasn't born in a manger that we celebrate every Christmas and had already everything locked up. Jesus grew. He knew his purpose as he got older, but he had to grow in wisdom, especially those around him. Scripture doesn't say this, but I can imagine that the king of the universe is going to come to earth and he's going to be raised by a carpenter. A humble man who provides for his family. A blue-collar guy who probably had these small town values because he lived in a small town in a village. That Jesus still had to glean and grow in wisdom and stature, and then he grew in his favor with God because he was growing. It's a growth mindset. So here's the question. Do you have a growth mindset, or are you and I stuck with feeling that change is impossible, or even worse, unnecessary?